Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Florida Georgia Line, titled Anything Goes. The time has come. I've been asked a number of times to weigh in on one of the most iconic duos in the short history of bro country, yet most instantaneously recognizable by so many people as the main faces of the subgenre. A duo that is responsible for the longest running #1 single on the country charts of all time, the instantly recognizable, mind-bogglingly stupid single Cruise. And with the massive success of the remix of that song with Nelly, they managed to propel bro country into the mainstream in one fell swoop, and have become single-handedly responsible for how most of, well, my generation perceives country music. Yep, the duo is Florida Georgia Line, loved by casual and bro country fans and despised by pretty much everybody else. And as the only country music critic on YouTube, my verdict is, they're not bad. I made the statement in the past that bro country in and of itself isn't a bad thing, and there are gradations of quality within the subgenre. You get acts that do it well, you get acts that screw it up, and unsurprisingly for being one of the biggest names in the format, Florida Georgia Line falls somewhere in the middle. Because believe it or not, I didn't hate Cruise when it first came out, and I still don't really hate it. Mostly because it's too blissfully moronic to hate or really get all that bothered about. You don't always need intellect or to make good pop or country music, and Cruise kind of worked for what it was. See, Florida Georgia Line had two big advantages in their favor: a ton of enthusiasm and a certain amount of authenticity, at least at the beginning. They weren't exactly polished or had a lot of dignity behind them, but you could tell they believed what they were selling. They didn't really come across as obnoxious to me. That's why the remix of Cruise and the Luke Bryan collaboration, This Is How We Roll, left something of a really sour taste in my mouth. They stripped away all the country twang and replaced it with all the stiff drum machines and egregious auto-tune. And while the original melodic structures of the songs did hold up, they lost a lot of flavor overall, even despite some pretty good melodies. Plus, nobody wants to hear Florida Georgia Line rap. Ever. But you know what? That was last year. And you better believe I was curious to see how Florida Georgia Line would be able to translate the narrow shelf life of bro country right now into something that'd be able to last beyond just the trend. And at first glimpse, it looked like the band was actually going to be able to pull it off, because the lead-off single, Dirt, looked like it was going in a very different direction, almost neo-traditional. But then I started to hear interviews from Scott Borchetta, head of Big Machine and affiliated with Republic Nashville, Florida Georgia Line's label, that his comments surrounding the necessity for country to diversify beyond the beer and tailgates and girls was directed at everyone except Florida Georgia Line. The duo seemed to be getting a free pass and an exemption to pump out just more of the same, and thus I didn't know what to expect with their newest album, Anything Goes, except with the fact that their title of the album probably wasn't a reference to the classic musical. So, what happened here? Well, I got pretty much exactly what I'd expect from Florida Georgia Line. A bunch of loud, brash, bro country songs that are only really distinctive from the rest that I've reviewed thus far this year by the fact that Florida Georgia Line have more unique personality than a Cole Swindle and aren't quite as obnoxious as a Thomas Rhett or a Chase Rice or a Tyler Farr. It's immediately obvious why Scott Borchetta was backpedaling as hard as he was with regards to Florida Georgia Line on this album, because with few exceptions, this isn't anything you haven't heard a dozen or more times this year. That said, there are some legitimately good songs on this album that don't just break the bro country mold, but show the duo as capable of a lot more beyond it. It's just a shame that the duo only wrote one of those songs. So, okay, let's start with the instrumentation and the production, where, okay, if you don't like the traditional trademarks of Florida Georgia Line's sound, high twangy banjos, a lot of electric guitars, a mix of drum machines and drums in the background, and cheap sounding effects all around, a large chunk of this album will definitely not be to your taste, and honestly I include myself in that number. I'll give the duo this: they can compose some pretty damn catchy melodies when they want to that sit right at the front of the mix, but that's because everything sits at the front of the mix, courtesy of producer Joey Moy, a Canadian producer who previously worked with Nickelback and fellow country act Jake Owen. And just like Jake Owen's Days of Gold, the production is cluttered, loud, and yet somehow highlights way more texture than you'd ever expect in the mix, except on the guitar solos, which is really weird. The unfortunate problem with this, though, is that Florida Georgia Line use way more electronic elements than Jake Owen does, and where songs like Beach and Ghost Town and Life at the Party all had room to breathe and really work as good songs on Days of Gold, Florida Georgia Line's mixes feel overstuffed, and it only highlights the very jarring contrast between organic instrumentation and the more synthetic parts, like the auto-tune and the drum machines. But that's not saying that there aren't some instrumental moments on this album that I did like. As goofy as Sundays sounded with the whistle and the steel drums, it's sort of lightweight Caribbean-inspired track that honestly could have coasted by without the drum machines altogether at the back of the mix. And the grit of Dirt with the organ was pretty potent in its own right. And that's not counting the solid melody on Sippin' on Fire, the more somber, quiet vibe of Bump in the Night with the bigger sounding production, the sharp edge of bitterness on Like You Ain't Even Gone that proved surprisingly potent thanks to the ghostly keyboard line, the high strumming on the guitars, and the genuinely excellent, rich, spacious sound of Confession. The album highlight for me that proves that Florida Georgia Line could easily jump into the groove-driven vibe of Dierks Bentley or Dustin Lynch, or even Brad Paisley right now and do a pretty solid job there. That's all said, it's painfully obvious that the hand clap percussion, the gang vocals that Florida Georgia Line use come from an electronic preset on a keyboard, especially on the closing track Every Day, which is just a really bad song. And they definitely should not be using any minor chord progressions anywhere on this album, because it adds a layer of sleaze to their delivery that makes them significantly less likable, and that's not a good thing. Because here's the thing, Florida Georgia Line would not have been able to supersize their careers in the mainstream if they didn't have that likability factor. The two are broadly sketched country boys that some would say border on caricature, especially with Tyler Hubbard's heavier accent and bigger personality, which can get a little grating at points. Makes me wish he gave his partner Brian Kelly a little bit more to do in front of the microphone. But you know what? When it's coming from a sincere place, it gains a shred of populism that the duo runs with as far as they possibly can. Now, the problem with going broad is that it tends to highlight a limited range of personality. And really, considering the lyrics, it's not like they need a huge range to pull off some of these songs. But here's the thing, on songs that demand more range and emotional investment, like Confession and Like You Ain't Even Gone, they do surprisingly well. That said, I'd be lying to say that if the harmonies between the two singers are anything close to interesting, and whenever they try to add auto-tune to a more unique voice, it sounds incredibly forced whenever they try to add pitch correction to Tyler Hubbard's vocals. It just does not sound good. It sounds better on Brian Kelly, to be honest. But here's where we come to the lyrics. And here's the thing. To say these songs have anything close to sophistication or complicated emotional dynamics or even much intelligence would be stretching the truth at best. And yeah, there are definitely moments where the lyrics get pretty damn stupid. Any reference to the blending hip-hop or old-school country feels incredibly forced. Saying you got your smell on is probably the most unflattering way to describe cologne I've heard in years. And describing a girl as your good is just as stupid as describing a girl as your angel is incredibly played out. Hell, even the more serious songs like Dirt aren't exactly immune to this, because as much as it is a pretty good song about heartland pride and remembering one's roots, it's still a song, quite literally, about dirt. So why aren't I as bothered by some of the awkward lyrics as I was by similar content from, say, like a Chase Rice? Well, part of it is a feel of cornball innocence behind Florida Georgia Line's lyrics. They're clumsy and definitely goofy at points, but I don't get the sort of leering douchebaggery or lechery that can put me off some elements of bro country. Now, sure, the lyrics imply that they're off going to get stoned and they want to get laid, but there's nothing all that explicit about how they describe it. Hell, the lyrics seem a lot more focused on describing the scene around them rather than the girls outside of some very cursory details, which mean the girls don't get objectified. And frankly, it's all the better for some wish fulfillment populism behind their songs. I think songs like Bump in the Night and The Wistful Smoke honestly feel surprisingly genuine. It makes a song like Confession have some legit weight as they ponder their past and reflect upon it. But here's where we hit the big stumbling block of this album. And for as much as Florida Georgia Line can set the stage really well, telling stories beyond that just seem to default to partying and girls. With only the darker track Like You Ain't Even Gone seeming to highlight some of the emptiness and running wild without the right person and showing some real drama behind the tracks. And that can mean that some of the emotional resonance that I get from writing on these tracks is painfully thin as well, just does not go beyond that. So in the end, look, there's a limit to how hard I can be on Anything Goes by Florida Georgia Line. The production is way more synthetic than I prefer, but there's also a fair bit of organic texture cutting through and some pretty potent melodies that are pretty catchy that I liked. Tyler Hubbard and Brian Kelly are broad and they're corny and they lack subtlety, but it lends them a certain naive charm that makes their songwriting feel really sincere. And yeah, it's all dumb as sand and there's not a lot of drama to it, but it ultimately feels pretty harmless. But then again, I do see points where the duo could have pushed a little bit harder, and yet they didn't. Content to stick with what works. And And on that note, I'm giving them a strong 5 out of 10 and an extremely tentative recommendation. Mostly they're fans who'd love to see them write the same brand of songs until the end of time. And you want all the power to them. There's clearly a market for this brand of bro country, and I can appreciate that. And they are pretty good at doing what they do. But at the same time, you need to ask the question what Florida Georgia Line are doing that sets them apart from just being louder and twangier than the rest of their competition. Because at some point coming up in the near future, as bro country continues to collapse, I'm sorry, that won't be enough. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Have any comments on this album beyond what I said, put it in the comments below. Or if there's anything else that I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.